is in attendance via Zoom. This is a hybrid meeting where all participants will be in person or video or audio conference. Members of the public have the opportunity to address the committee if they have signed up for the public comment per the rules published on the agenda and on our website Friday. We'll call for the speakers when we get to the individual agenda items you have signed up for. We will go to agenda item A. This is EC 237, the Near Heights Community Planning Area Assessment Report. I move receipt be noted.
Second.
All right, counselors, are there any questions? Counselor, okay,
Madam, we're gonna have a presentation.
we are, but we're gonna, yeah. Is there anyone signed up for speaking on this one?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one person.
All right, go ahead.
Our first speaker on Zoom will be Peter Kovitsa. Mr. Kovitsa, you're up, sir.
Oh, we have a presentation. There we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. I'm Peter Kalitzis, speaking on the Near Heights Community Planning with some comments from the president of the Parkland Hills Neighborhood Association. I'll begin with her comments. Janet Simon. We support Pat Davis's recommended addition regarding Catherine and San Mateo to add the policy stating support development along the corridor, honors the historic small businesses, revitalizes vacant land and attracts tourists and surrounding community members. We also support and request that we be included in Nob Hill Neighborhood Association's recommendation of decreasing the density of cannabis retailers for that reason, because its effect. Similar to the reason that Old Town, affecting tourism and activity, we're in a redeveloping area. So we're supporting a more comprehensive list, particularly the international district. I'm speaking for me now because we didn't get a chance to discuss too much on this, but that's what President Simon said. It's even more important in the economically depressed area along the international district. We've already experienced a cannabis retailer flying in a private jet to purchase property in our area. Proliferation of these businesses would interfere with the economic development. Right now, there's actually going in for a permit for new apartments and retail. As someone who's lived here for over 43 years, within blocks of San Mateo, I've seen the loss of a grocery store, pharmacy, bakery, insurance, hardware, architect's office, full service gas station, and residents along San. Please include these limitations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think that's it for public comment on this item. Do we have a staff presentation, Ms. Schultz?
Madam Chair, we do. We have Mr. Cox, who on behalf of council staff will give a presentation, and then our friends from the planning department are also sitting out there. And if there are specific questions for them, they're available as well.
All right, thank you. Mr. Cox?
Derek Committee, thank you so much. We are discussing the Near Heights Community Planning Area. This is east of I-25, south of I-40, west of Wyoming, all the way down to the Sunport area, and incorporates districts 7, 6, and 2. So the timeline for this first CPA was a bit all over the place for a number of reasons, but we'll start with back in 2017, the adoption of the comp plan, which established the kind of idea and the model of the community planning areas. We had to wait for the adoption of the IDO in 2018. In 2019, we went through a study to establish the order of the CPAs and also engage with the communities to understand what is the best way to communicate and reach out to them. In 2020, we adopted that order and started. Going through two different computers. So the process of the CPAs, really the first part is really about going out into the community. That first phase starts with basically the existing data that the city has, demographics, zoning, land uses, anything that our Aegis organization and other departments have obtained. This looks like this on the city website, different graphs, tables, trying to make it as transparent as possible for the public. It also looks like this, different maps. We have a whole storyboard on the Near Heights website that the team worked on. The other part of the data collection is that qualitative side where we are going out into the community. Unfortunately, in 2020, we also had COVID. That introduced, so sorry, y'all. All right, that introduced Zoom and virtual engagement. The team did their best and attended a ton of Zoom meetings, created a ton of online surveys, and still practiced the qualitative approach, really taking anything and everything people would say. And that could be as little as I love my park without even identifying that park. It could be as great as going on a full essay about walkability in their neighborhood. After the COVID restrictions were kind of lessened and lightened, the team went out to the public. This is kind of what it looks like on a short bit. Basically a ton of community meetings, going to community centers, libraries, community organizations, parks. We have a plan van that comes with Wi-Fi and a whiteboard so we can do community meetings wherever we please. It's great. Hard to drive, but it works. And so through that, it looks really similar to online engagement as well. We took anything and everything people said, and basically just discussed their neighborhoods and the communities. After that first phase of engagement, where it was a temperature check of really seeing what was coming out from the community, we went back to the community and discussed, is this actually relevant to what y'all are discussing? Did we hear you right? Etc. From there, we really started working with our internal partners, the community organizations out in the neighborhoods we were going to start kind of deciphering what policies, what actions we could accomplish. What does that language look like? What do departments, what can they take on in their limited capacity? We didn't want to promise anything that no one could actually come through with. And so what that looks like in the end is a list of policies. This is in section 5 and 6 of the report, the policies and actions. All of these, for the most part, are specific to the Near Heights geographic area. That is the big difference between kind of normal comp plan policies that rely on a full citywide scale. These are diving into kind of a community identity that we're trying to identify. Within section 4 of the comprehensive plan, there is a specific policy section for each CPA area. And so the Near Heights being the first one, it will be the first to be filled. This is coming to y'all as an EC, and so it's a yes or no type of vote, but the policies will come back to y'all through a comp plan update at some point in the future. And that's where these changes kind of can be talked about a bit more in detail. Yeah, this is what the comp plan in section 4 page looks like. And these are the actions, so similar. You'll see departments are lead responsibility and partner and collaborators in this table as well. That is the gist of it, and I am here to answer any questions. We also have our Near Heights CPA team members here to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Did this administration have any comments on this? Okay.
Nothing for me, Alan, do you have?
Okay. Counselors, any questions for anyone? Okay, we have a motion and a second, so all those in favor, oh, we have somebody on Zoom, so we have to do it individually. Please call roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Grubb,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pivofor.
Yes.
That passes on a 5-0 vote.
All right, thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to item B. Councilor Bitten.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item B is 072. This is adopting a text amendment to the Integrated Development Ordinance for the North Fourth Corridor Character Protection Overlay Zone, also known as CPO 9. Small mapped area related to the applicability of setback and step back requirements. I move a recommendation that we pass.
Second. Thank you. All right, 02272 is a quasi judicial request, which requires special procedures to allow the applicant, staff, and the public the opportunity to speak. This agenda item will be proceeding as follows. Council planning staff has 5 minutes, and then testimony by public speakers will be limited to 2 minutes each. Then we'll have rebuttal by the applicant for 5 minutes. Cross-examination by anyone who spoke during public comment, 2 minutes each. Comments by planning department, if there are any, 5 minutes, and then council planning staff will do closing comments for 5 minutes. City staff, members of the public, and the applicant must be sworn in. If you'll be speaking on this item as a staff member or a member of the public, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm? Oh, no one else? Okay. Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true? All right. And we have somebody. Oh, there, Peggy. Thank you. I see her. All right. So we'll start with council planning staff, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. This item is a component of the 2022 IDO annual update because it relates to a small mapped area. It's a standalone agenda item beyond kind of the citywide proposed changes that you will be considering next month. This relates to the North Fourth Character Protection Overlay Zone. I've got a map of that area on the screen. Generally, that runs from Mountain Road to the south to the city limits to the north, including all of the commercially zoned parcels adjacent to 4th Street. The proposed changes in this ordinance are technical in nature. This is the newest overlay zone to be adopted into the integrated development ordinance, and unbeknownst to us, when we originally drafted the language, there was a little bit of a loophole that we did not foresee until it was put to the test. Generally, this CPO seeks to create a particular pedestrian-oriented streetscape along 4th Street. So as development comes in along 4th Street, we want nice big sidewalks, buildings that are a little set back, buildings that include a step back. And that's one of the main goals of the CPO. However, when we drafted the language related specifically to setbacks and step backs, that language referred to something called the front facade. In practice, I think we would expect that buildings along 4th Street would always have a front facade along 4th Street. However, if the building takes up an entire block or is on a corner, there's an opportunity for the developer to say that their front facade is along a roadway that is not 4th Street. So the proposed changes that you see here in red seek to close what I would refer to as that loophole, which will make sure that any development along 4th Street, that particular facade and pedestrian realm that we are trying to accomplish is always there. In the fall of last year, as required by the IDO, individual notice was sent to 1,740 property owners. That's all the property owners within that boundary. We sent notice to the 12 applicable neighborhood associations. And council staff, myself, responded to 10 phone calls from interested property owners who got those letters, called me and said, what the heck are you doing here? Zoning is confusing. Can you tell me a little bit more about this proposal? Most callers and most public commenters were not concerned with the proposal in any way. There's been overwhelming support from the public perspective on this item. Also required by the IDO, council staff held 2 pre-application meetings in October. This precedes the Environmental Planning Commission process, where we invite the applicable neighborhood associations to just tell them about the request before we even submit an application. Those were facilitated meetings. The report can be found in the EPC record. But again, there were no concerns from the participants of those meetings. Next step in the process was for the proposal to be considered by the Environmental Planning Commission. That happened at 1 meeting in December of 2022. There was only 1 member of the public who spoke at that meeting, again, in support of the request. And the EPC did go on to recommend approval subject to findings. That brings us to the Lux process. The EPC is only a recommending body in this matter, so if it is the will of this committee and the council, we can certainly deviate from that recommendation of the EPC. Otherwise, the EPC recommended approval, that would affirm the ordinance, that would make this, kind of technical change to the North Fork CPO. I'm going to pause there for a moment. There is one amendment in your packet that I can go over when you're ready, but now might be a good time to ask any questions of staff and take public comment before I talk about the proposed committee amendment.
Okay. Any questions for staff? All right, let's go to Ms. Norton.
Okay, I guess I already swore in. I'm president of the North Valley Coalition, and we support this this amendment, the amendment and the change to the CPO. It really just clarifies the intent, as Ms. Schultz said, of what we wanted in the CPO. And it's to help 4th Street be a walkable corridor, but also a look nice corridor to add some architectural features that might not be there otherwise. And the problem with the corner lots and things, there were a couple projects that went in that didn't have to follow this. So this just amends that to reality. And we are a neighborhood coalition of everything in the North Valley from I-40 to the boundary and the river to I-25. So our executive committee was aware of this. We haven't exactly met too much on it, but we were involved in clarifying what we wanted here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. All right, do we want to move the amendment now?
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think a motion to move it needs to be made before I discuss.
Yes.
I'll move the amendment.
Second. All right. Ms. Schultz?
There's one amendment to this item that is entirely technical in nature. It does not change the substance of what the bill does or deviates from the original intention in any way. When staff was drafting this ordinance, there was some language that was erroneously left out, language that was originally proposed, language that the EPC recommended approval on. This was truly just a technical error by staff. Apologies for that necessitating a committee amendment, but this will just clean up the ordinance to make sure that the intention as put forth by the original sponsor and recommended by EPC is met.
All right, thank you. Any questions on the amendment? All right, roll, go ahead and call the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Crowe,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Peebleford.
Yes.
That passes on 5-0.
All right, so now that we have the amended bill, let's hear from the applicant.
Madam Chair, the city was the applicant
Oh.
in this case, and so council staff plays the role of the council presentation and the applicant for this item.
Okay.
So I do not have any additional presentation for you on this matter. I'm here to answer any questions though if you have them.
And I am going to assume, Ms. Norton, that you don't have any cross-examination?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, planning department? Any questions, any comments? You've got 5 minutes if you want it. All right. All right, close, Ms. Schultz.
Madam Chair, committee members, I have nothing to close, but again, here to answer any questions.
All right, any questions? All right, we'll go to the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Crowe,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Peebleford.
Yes,
That passes on 5-0 vote.
thank you. All right, we're going to move on to agenda item C, and that's Counselor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. Let me just get to it. We'll move 073. It's adopting a text amendment to the integrated development ordinance for the Northwest Mesa Escarpment View Protection Overlay Zone. Small mapped area related to the applicability of height restrictions applied to structures that exist outside of the VPO2 boundary.
Second. All right, thank you. All right, you're going to hear this a couple times, so get ready. 02373 is a quasi judicial request, which requires special procedures to allow the applicant, staff, and the public the opportunity to speak. This agenda item will proceed as follows. We'll have 5 minutes from council planning staff, then 2 minutes from any public speakers, 5 minutes rebuttal by the applicant, cross-examination by anyone who spoke during public comment, 2 minutes each. Comments by planning staff, if there are any, 5 minutes, and then council planning staff will have 5 minutes to close. City staff, members of the public, and the applicant must be sworn in. If you'll be speaking to this item as a staff member or a member of the public, please raise your right hand. That's what you're here for. Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true?
Yes.
Ms. Schultz, let's start with an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, and members of the public. Again, this is a component of the 2022 IDO annual update. So we are proposing to amend the integrated development ordinance. What I'm showing on the screen here is a map of the Northwest Mesa Escarpments View Protection Overlay Zone, which seeks to regulate kind of height and building mass in this northwest part of Albuquerque when development occurs in proximity to the Petroglyph National Monument and the escarpments, an area that the city intends to be kind of sensitive to. The proposed change, I'm going to skip ahead to an image which I think will better describe the proposal here. So I've taken a random snippet of parcels that exist within and adjacent to this overlay zone today. What you're seeing on the screen is the yellow area is where the height restrictions within this view protection overlay zone exist. If you're developing within that kind of yellow bubbly area, you cannot build taller than 15 feet in height. What the IDO says is that for any parcel where that yellow boundary line crosses any portion of the parcel, the entire parcel is subject to that 15-foot boundary. A little bit of history about why we have this VPO and where it came from is useful here. Prior to the IDO, there was a plan in place called the Northwest Mesa Escarpment Area Plan. And what it said was development within 600 feet of the escarpment is limited to 15 feet in height. When the IDO was adopted, this map was based on that 600 foot boundary. What did not exist was this definition that I have on the previous slide that said when that small boundary crosses the lot line that the entire parcel is subject to the restriction. So that was a new addition with the IDO. What this amendment seeks to do is it acknowledges that in the northwest part of town where these parcels are pretty large in size, that applying that rule in this area is pretty onerous for these properties. Most of these properties are zoned for commercial development, either having mixed use, that's MX zoning, or non-residential zoning, that's NR zoning, where we expect and the comprehensive plan encourages commercial development. Commercial development cannot occur within a 15-foot building envelope. We've looked at plans for gyms and grocery stores and restaurants, and 15 feet is not feasible. And so the proposal in this amendment brings back the intention of that original Northwest Mesa Escarpment Area Plan to say only buildings that fall within that yellow boundary are subject to the 15-foot height restriction. So if a property owner has an extremely large parcel and maybe, say only 10% of it actually falls within that yellow boundary, only that 10% would be subject to the 15-foot height restriction. The rest of the property could develop under the rest of the IDO rules. Very similar to the last item, letters were sent to 11,720 property owners. We had to notify everyone who exists within this boundary, even if their property would not be subject to this change. Again, residentially zoned properties are not applicable for this change, only mixed use and non-residential properties. Notice was sent to the 15 applicable neighborhood associations in the area. In December, council staff again fielded phone calls of people who got one of those 11,000 letters and said, what the heck are you proposing here? Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Most of the callers, once they learned what the proposal did, that it didn't affect their property, it did not affect their neighbor's property, were not concerned with the request. In October of 2022, per IDO requirements, council staff held 2 pre-application meetings. Again, those are meetings that precede the environmental planning commission process. And those facilitated meeting notes are in the EPC record. Those were pretty well attended, and most, if not all, attendees of those meetings were opposed to the request for concerns over increased height, density, kind of activity in proximity to the escarpments. The EPC took public comments on this matter at their one meeting in December. Again, quite a few folks who reside in the area showed up to that EPC meeting, provided public comments, and echoed the same things that I heard at the pre-application meeting, which is that they were opposed to the request over concerns about increased density and activity in the area. One more note about the public engagement process. There have been emails and there were notes about ex parte communication related to this request. This request is quasi judicial in nature, which means counselors, the decision makers, should not participate in ex parte communication outside of a public hearing such as this. There have been claims in email that Counselor Lewis, who is sponsoring this item, did have ex parte communication, and therefore he should either be recused or not participate in the votes. Council staff did look into that matter pretty seriously. With Madam Chair, may I continue?
Continue,
Presentation?
yeah,
Thank
finish
you. And determined that quasi judicial procedures were followed. The interest in this change came directly to council staff, and council staff interfaced with the counselor. That is normal and expected procedure for a quasi judicial text amendment to the IDO, where council staff kind of acts as the barrier to that ex parte communication. At the EPC meeting in December, the planning department staff recommended denial of this request. They recommended denial based on an assertion that the criteria required by the IDO were not satisfied. The EPC, based on public comments, the applicant presentation, planning staff presentation, ultimately agreed with that recommendation and did recommend denial of that request to this body. Again, it is the purview of the council to accept that EPC recommendation and deny the request, or it is within your purview to also go in a different direction than the EPC. If you choose to disagree with them, to say that you do feel like the request was adequately justified, ultimately that would result in an approval of the ordinance and an approval of this change. There is one committee amendment that I can talk about in a moment, but this again might be a good point to stop and answer any questions from the committee and take public comments.
Okay. Any
Madam
questions? Yeah, Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Benton.
Madam Chair, if it's, I think the notes or the staff recommendations or the staff, comments in the committee amendment, I think are applicable to the, to what was just presented. And so if it's okay, I'd like, our staff to at least describe the amendment and talk about the just alternative findings that go along with that amendment.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Councilor Benton, do you mind holding off on
No,
your
that's
question?
fine.
All right, let's go ahead and move the amendment. Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, I move the amendment.
I'll second.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lewis, I'd be happy to do that. What came over with the ordinance from the Environmental Planning Commission is the record that supports denial of the request. If it's the will of the council and with movement of the amendment, it's the will of Councilor Lewis that the ordinance be approved. The council needs to adopt findings that affirm the ordinance. And so what you have in your iPads is policy justification that adequately justifies the request, does meet or furthers a preponderance of comprehensive plan policies. So where the EPC said a preponderance of comprehensive plan policies were not furthered, resulting in a recommendation of denial, the findings before you today offer a different perspective and say that there is adequate justification.
And then, Madam Chair, I know it's it might take a few minutes to read those, but I would like to ask the staff to read through those because we did read through the EPC finding there. I think it's important just to add the record that the findings for this as well.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis.
Madam
Madam
Chair,
Chair.
Councilor Lewis, I'd be happy to do that. Give me a moment to pull that up. It's several pages. Okay, I will start reading these policy justifications. Feel free to stop and ask questions if you have them. So the first criteria in the IDO says that the proposed small area amendment has to be consistent with the health, safety, and general welfare of the city, as shown by furthering a preponderance of applicable goals and policies in the comp plan as amended. The response to that is the building height limits will still apply within the boundary of that height restriction. I'm gonna zoom back up to my map here. So nothing within the yellow boundary that you are seeing on the screen today will change. Building height limits will still be limited to 15 feet. While allowing more flexibility for non-residential and mixed-use developments, the proposed change furthers the following applicable goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. The first policy is 4.1.2, identity and design. That policy says that the city should protect the identity and cohesiveness of neighborhoods by ensuring the appropriate scale and location of development, mix of uses, and character of building design. The response to that policy is that this view protection, that all view protection overlay zones are intended to preserve areas with unique and distinctive views that are worthy of conservation. And this VPO2 specifically is intended to protect views looking to and from the Petroglyph National Monuments. The boundary for the height restriction subarea, again, the yellow area you see on the screen, is based upon boundaries first established in the former Northwest Mesa Escarpment Plan from 1987, which created height limitations for the area located within approximately 650 feet of the escarpment face. In some locations where the land was already subdivided in 1987, the subarea follows lot lines and public rights of way, but in other areas, it follows a simple distance buffer from the escarpment face with no attention paid to lot lines that may have been created in the past 30+ years, or those areas that have not yet been subdivided. The current application of this sub area and the maximum height limitation to entire parcels, even if only a small portion of a lot is within the sub area, is significantly limiting, especially for large mixed use and non-residentially zoned lots that may not be further subdivided like low density residential areas typically are. This request follows that policy because it balances the view protection goals of VPO2. This VPO is VPO2. And the long-held policy intent of the city to maintain views that are to and from the escarpment face, while also allowing for appropriately scaled mixed use and non-residential development per the underlying zone designations outside of the sub-area boundary. Madam Chair and Councilor Lewis, that's one of about the 17 policies that are justified. I'm happy to continue reading all the policy justification if you'd like, but that's kind of a snapshot of some of the justification.
And Madam Chair, I think, Shannon, if you would you don't have to read every single one of them, but would you do just a brief summary of each one?
Yep.
I think it's important just to add it to the record.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Lewis, absolutely. The next policy justified relates to placemaking, which says that the city should protect and enhance special places in the built environment. That policy is furthered because it does ensure this proposal does ensure the continued protection of views to and from the Northwest Mesa Escarpment, again, because we're not touching anything within that existing yellow boundary, while creating some nuance and additional flexibility for mixed use and non-residential development. Policy 4.14 relates to neighborhoods, which says that we should enhance, protect, and preserve neighborhoods and traditional communities. The response to that policy is this change creates an exception only for larger mixed use and non-residential properties. Again, it's not applicable to residentially zoned parcels and does not affect the low density residential areas within the VPO2. The next policy relates to natural resources, which says that the city should encourage high quality development and redevelopment that responds appropriately to the natural setting and ecosystem functions. That policy is furthered because additional refinement of the applicability of the height restriction sub area, so nuancing out how that order is applied, properly responds to their setting near the Northwest Mesa Escarpments. Limits on building heights near the escarpment edge will still apply while allowing a stepping up of height that is further and beyond that kind of 650-foot border that's been created. Goal 5.4 talks about a jobs housing balance, which says the city should balance jobs and housing by encouraging residential growth, near employment across the region, and prioritizing job growth west of the Rio Grande. The response to that is providing this flexibility for mixed use and non-residential properties furthers this goal. Because this request may make it easier for these larger parcelized sites to develop with commercial uses where otherwise they will likely be limited only to residential developments within that 15-foot building envelope. Policy 5.4.2 talks about jobs on the west side and says that we should foster employment opportunities on the west side. Very similar policy response to the previous one, which was this offers some flexibility for commercial development west of the river. Policy 5.7.2 talks about regulatory alignment and says that the city should update our regulatory framework to support desired growth, high quality development, economic development, housing, a variety of transportation modes, and quality of life priorities. This policy is furthered because it does support economic development opportunities. The intention is to allow commercial development on the west side in a way that is maybe more flexible than what's allowed today. Policy 7.3.2 talks about community character and says that the city should encourage design strategies that recognize and embrace the character differences that give communities their distinct identities and make them safe and attractive places. Specifically, the city should design development to reflect the character of the surrounding area and protect and enhance views. Again, because we're not touching the 15-foot height restriction within 650 feet of the base of the escarpment, those views will still maintain and be in place. Policy 8.1.1 talks about diverse places and says the city should foster a range of interesting places and contexts with different development intensities, densities, uses, and building scale to encourage economic development opportunities. This policy is furthered by the request because allowing an increase in building heights beyond the limits in the height restriction sub area could help foster a greater variety of intensities, densities, and uses. Policy 11.3.1 talks about natural and cultural features, which generally says that the city should preserve and enhance the natural and cultural characteristics and features that contribute to the distinct identity of communities, neighborhoods, and cultural landscapes. This policy is furthered because the request creates an additional nuance within the view protection overlay zone that again continues to preserve and enhance the protections that are there today related to the cultural characteristics of the Northwest Mesa Escarpment. The intent of the overlay is to protect the views to and from the escarpment, and that will continue within that adopted boundary. Okay, there's only two more. Policy 11.3.4 talks specifically about the Petroglyph National Monument, and it says that the city should regulate adjacent development to protect and preserve the Petroglyph National Monument, its volcanoes, petroglyphs, and Northwest Mesa Escarpment as a priceless cultural landscape and community resource that provides physical, cultural, and economic benefits. This VPO2 itself is the mechanism that the city uses to protect that special area and regulate development adjacent to that special area. This policy is furthered because it adjusts the regulation slightly to respond to the needs of mixed use and commercial development that fall outside of the sub-height area, again, the yellow area on the screen, while still maintaining that protection within 650 feet of the face. That concludes the policy justification as it relates to the comprehensive plan. The Environmental Planning Commission took little issue with the other criteria required to be justified for this type of request. It was primarily what they perceived as a conflict with existing policies within the comprehensive plan. And that is an overview of the opposite perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Any questions? Councilor Ben.
So the conflict that you were just talking about, the DPC referred to. Where did they see that as a conflict? In what way did they see that as a conflict? I understand they heard public comment and concluded what they concluded, but I'm not sure. I don't quite understand what they saw conflicting them.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilor Benson. There was this general concern because the comprehensive plan does identify that the Northwest Mesa Escarpment and the petroglyphs are a special place that we should protect. that allowing additional height outside of the boundary where it would have been allowed prior to the IDO is still inappropriate, even though that development would fall outside of an established boundary.
And Madam Chair, if I could, you described a concern on the part of the public testimony before the EPC that density was a concern, but this CPO density per se is not part of the CPO, is it? This is a visual sight line protection and really doesn't have to do with density or what development is. In other words, what the use is decided upon, it's applied for by the property owner, but rather just maintaining that sight line. That has been my understanding of the history of this. I've been here long enough to have been, I think, involved in one of the updates, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong about that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Benson, that's correct. The VPO2 itself doesn't talk about density. It doesn't talk about uses. It even has graphics that talk about what you just discussed, maintaining a sight line. If someone, standing on a property and looks at the escarpment, that they should be able to maintain a view of that escarpment within that 650 foot boundary from the escarpment itself. So yes.
And to reiterate, just to make sure I heard it right, that 650 was decided upon in the original zoning that created this provision.
Madam Chair, Councilor Benson, yes, it was.
In 1980, what?
1987, and in that plan, there wasn't a map like the IDO dictates here. When we adopted the integrated development ordinance, when we took all of those old area plans and translated them into overlay zones, if there were boundaries that were described, we created maps because it's much easier from a planning perspective to facilitate development with maps. And that's really where the conflict comes in. Because we have officially mapped that 650 foot boundary, that definition in the back of the book that talks about when you have a mapped boundary and it crosses even a tiny bit of a parcel line, the entire parcel comes into play. That's why that was not in effect in between 1987 and 2017, because no map technically existed for that regulation. Development would just come in on a case-by-case basis, measure on their site plan where that 650 foot line fell and would indicate compliance from there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Lewis.
yes. So question for our staff, the IDO actually extended the boundary because here's my understanding that, there's the original boundary from the 80s. What the IDO did is add that extension there, where if the boundary crossed any property, it would apply to all of the property. And so this change is not a change to the boundary whatsoever. It would allow portions of those properties that are outside of the boundaries to have the higher height restriction, but those parcels of the property that or portions of the property that are within the boundary would still apply. So my question is just to clarify that the IDO actually furthered the extension of the boundary, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lewis, yeah, the way that you just described how the IDO interprets these boundary lines now is entirely accurate. In the example that is shown on the screen, some of those larger parcels that only have a portion of that yellow bubble within them, I think that's an accurate characterization to say that the boundary, kind of pseudo got extended to the entirety of that parcel where it would not have been extended to prior to adoption of the IDO.
Yeah, so the EPC, did they refer to the original boundary as this would? I think there's, and that's what I was understood, that the EPC really kind of had some general statements without really addressing the fact that, if they referred to the original boundary and said that somehow they understood this for one reason or another, violating that policy. It really, it doesn't at all. I mean, it really reflects kind of a misunderstanding of what the IDO did and then what this amendment would be doing. So, because it's not in any way an extension of that boundary and not in any way a variance of height restrictions that are within the boundary.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lewis, yes, the Environmental Planning Commission did not discuss in depth the relation of how this boundary used to be interpreted prior to the IDO versus the definition that the IDO created, which led to the new interpretation of the entire parcel being affected. I think that's correct.
Councilor Davis, I'm sorry, Councilor Lewis, did you have anything else?
No, I think, yeah, we can go on to the next part.
All right, thank you. So if there's no other questions from the committee, I'd like to move to public testimony. Mr. Cornelius, do I have the latest list or do you have the latest list?
That's the latest.
Okay, all right, so let's start. And when you're called, you can come up here and I'll give you 2 names in a row so you can get ready if you're the next one. First is Anthony Williams and second will be Kyle Falls. Anthony.
Madam Chair, committee members, good evening. I own, my wife and I, who's with me, own a partial interest in the piece of property. If you can see the panhandle on the map up there, it's right at the corner of Kimmick and Paseo del Norte. The effect of the language in the IDO that makes all of the lot subject to this 100-foot strip has the effect of taking 100 feet that we had at one point that was subject to the height restriction and extending it southward through the entire 410 feet of the property. The property is zoned MXM and would otherwise, except for the height restriction, allow taller buildings, allow commercial development for which there's a viable market, and that has essentially been taken away by the IDO. The IDO on its face says that it shall not affect prior zoning and it can't be interpreted that way. But the effect of this together is that it in effect has radically downzoned our property. That would be bad enough, except that the city and these and the property owners, including us, entered into a special assessment district arrangement where there's millions of dollars for our property alone. I think it's 1.2 million of private capital that has come in for infrastructure development, and all of that has been based upon an appraisal that assumed that the MXM zoning was applicable to the property. So we have a situation where we have been paying debt service on this special assessment district for many years. Please support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Kyle Falls.
Yes.
And after Kyle will be Jane, and I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Jane, but we'll get you to tell us in a minute.
Hi, Madam Chair. Members of the council. I'm in the same boat as Tony just spoke of. My name is Kyle Falls. And we've been at this since 1963, actually. My grandfather, D.W. Falls, was the developer of Taylor Ranch. And we've paid property taxes and invested in the city of Albuquerque for that long. So the height restriction on commercial building, I'm just going to plead with you to please reconsider that. We're not asking for a building to be built this size, but we are asking for it to be lifted a little bit. The concept that I had in mind for that yellow area there would be something similar to Louisiana corridor there. Where it'd be north of I-40. And if you'll look along that corridor, there's plenty of business that's one story, but needs to be a height elevation of more than 15 feet. Not by much, but a little bit more. So I just ask you to please consider that.
Madam Chair, thank you, Mr. Pauls. Yes. Yes, thank you, sir. So you're saying very simplistically, because I have a simple mind, that you don't mind if this were to raise the height, you just want to limit it to basically a traditional two-story.
Exactly. Be fair to what businesses of Albuquerque Uptown have done. We're not asking for much, but we need a little bit more than 15 feet. If we could just match, I mean, my house is a single story and the roof line it's a little bit more than 15 feet from my foundation to the pitch of the roof. So a business needs to be a little higher. If it's a restaurant, they're going to have vents and so forth to be able to operate. And I'm just asking for that 15-foot restriction to be lifted just somewhat.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jane. I apologize for not knowing how to pronounce your last name, but please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. I would be surprised if you did. I'm Jane Beckley, and I'm speaking as a representative of the Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association. Our position has the unanimous approval of our 7-member board. Santa Fe Village lies within the Northwest Mesa Escarpment BPO. When we received a notice in November of 2022, the board strongly opposed the proposed changes to the VPO2, and we remain strongly opposed. We have participated in every opportunity to engage on this, every meeting. Shanna can attest to that, I'm sure, and submitted written in-person comments. I sent our written comments through the council staff last week, detailing all of our concerns, specifically as they relate to what we perceive as conflicts with key ABC policies. They're more than 2 minutes worth, but the gist of it is we continue to see multiple and substantial conflicts with ABC comp plan goals and policies, particularly as they relate to protecting heritage landscapes, encouraging culturally appropriate, not development appropriate to the natural landscape and the distinct identity of the Northwest Mesa Escarpment. We are particularly concerned about the Petroglyph National Monument. And I would note that the ABC comp plan in that language refers to and surrounding lands. We disagree with the assertion that sector plan provisions don't really apply at this point, because as I read the IDO, in fact, they're cited in an explanation of the various protection overlays. We're also concerned about the creation of a separate and seemingly conflicting standard about how overlay protections are applied, because throughout the city, overlay protections apply to a property when it is both in and out of the boundary. And these zones, thank you.
Thank you. Billy Wright, and then we'll have Renee Horvath.
Madam Chair and councilman, I am responsible for the notices to the property owners, the general partner, Forest Noah and Volcano Cliffs Inc. and Group 1. And as such, I am deeply disturbed by the effect of the additional height restrictions on prospects for sale. With just the 7-acre parcel, we were assessed $1,204,000 for infrastructure. And with the height restriction, you can't even recover that, much less the original cost or profit. And so it's really established a very defeating effect. For your information, I'm 91 years old. And one of my purposes was to last long enough to see the sale of the property and the seize of the existence of the Sub-S Corporation and the partnerships. I wanted to see it closed out. I wanted to see it completed. And so I'm asking you to approve Councilor Lewis's amendment to remove the restriction in height. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I'll have a quick question for you, sir. Hope I'm doing as good a work as you are when I'm at your age, 20 years hence. But I would say you based on your comments, I'm assuming you concur with some of the previous speakers who say that effectively you cannot build a commercial building within that height limit.
That's right. You can, and you can't even restrict a 15-foot height. Purchasers won't even look at the property for that. They just go on down the road. They can find the property that, and yet we've got houses going up. They've just completed what Stan Diamond had specified as tract C. D.R. Horton and Abruzzo split the number of lots. I think there was 100 and something each. And they've completed construction of those houses, and those are just across the street from the property. So, and then Pulte has bought 60 acres just west of the property. And they're busily getting the land prepared for housing. And so we've got a lot of housetops now to serve, and we need commercial property for them to have a neighborhood business. So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
we
Thank you,
need
sir.
to pass this amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Ray.
you.
Renee Horvath, followed by Ms. Samuel.
Hi. This guy here.
Perfect timing.
And I just let you know, just about every door in this building's locked, so it's hard to get into the place. So you might figure out which door people should enter and let them know ahead of time. Well, I sent a letter in, you hopefully saw it. And so I've been involved in this area for many years because I helped iPeaceful do the first photographic inventory of the petroglyphs, which helped creation of the monument, letting people know how significant this area is. And there's no other city that has such unique topography like we do here in Albuquerque, because we have a Rio Grande Rift that's sinking, we have mountains, we have a valley, and we have the volcanoes. Not every city has volcanoes with this unique land formations of rock outcrops. And even as a teenager, I was hiking up there. I couldn't believe how incredible this space was, and how much wildlife there was. So there was a lot of effort to help create the national monument. And we're really grateful for that. And it wasn't an easy effort either. But the lands that we could not acquire, it was kind of painful not to be able to acquire all that. But it was hopeful that we would get, they said, well, there's good design standards. And I'm like, okay, that's a hope that we can design this so that we would complement the landscape. And so a lot of that has to deal with keeping the building heights low, blending with the earth tone colors. And, having a buffer away from the escarpment really helps. And as you drive up to the escarpment, I'm always so grateful that the houses are low. And so in this area where the overlay is, it's kind of around the escarpment. And it does keep the building heights low. And it's one protection that we do have. And as we went through the EPC hearing, looking at the staff report, I'm like, yeah, she really understood, because there are policies that we got that encourages sensitive development, and the EPC agrees. So I just want to let you know that. I hope that we can maintain it, because I think we'll better protect it, because the regular IDO rules are pretty intense. They allow really tall buildings.
Thank you. Oh,
Madam Chair.
yes, sir.
Ms. Horvath, thanks for your service to our open space system and good reason we
Oh,
put
thank
you on
you.
that board. So thanks for that. Just quick question. I mean, do you acknowledge though that do you understand this argument that to a great extent, much of these commercially zoned properties or mixed use zone properties would be undevelopable except for low density residential?
It seems like we do kind of need low density residential, and especially up there, it's more appropriate. I think it started out that way, more low density residential.
Mhm.
My understanding when they were first starting to develop plans was the intensity would be around unserved for sale area. That would be more the urban center and more intense,
Mhm.
and everything else around it would be less.
Mhm.
So, and I think we have to realize there's not a lot of access off that mesa. You only got unserved for sale to get into town, and so it's not a grid system like you have in the Northeast Heights where you can go in all different directions. So traffic is an issue if you're gonna increase so much density, because most of your mixed use zoning is pretty intense, all buildings and apartments. That's what's the trend now, is apartments. And that's what we're getting, a lot of apartments, and a lot of people are concerned about the building heights. So, and I know that the Park Service, it says in the staff, on the notice of decision, that the Park Service, and I've talked to the superintendent, she has a lot of concern about how intense this area is going to get. We need to re-examine this, maybe re-look at how we do this, because she's really worried, because she thinks intensity is going to be too much for the monument. And
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Horvath. Maria and Samuel next, and then, I'm sorry, Councilor Lewis, did you have a question?
Madam Chair, yeah, and just a question for Ms. Horvath, and I do appreciate her coming down tonight. But we've had we talked in some of the previous speakers talked about the previous sector plans with which I worked with Ms. Horvath on those sector plans. We're always working to balance commercial and residential, and the sentiment I think when it comes to new areas and like that is like what we're talking about is to really to limit residential. I mean, we have a lot of people that live on the west side, but not a lot of services that we do on the east side. And so some of the previous sector plans sought to really guide where that development could take place. But also, I guess I would ask Ms. Horvath, because we've worked on this for a good while, but you understand that you would agree that that this amendment does not in any way change the previous sector plan boundaries from the monument, correct?
well, let's see, I think starting with the Northwest Mesa Escarpment Plan, we still have that impact area to keep the building heights at 15 feet. And I think that's what this is based off of.
Yeah, so the boundary is the exact same boundary as the escarpment plan.
Yeah, oh, okay, well, in the IDO, that overlay zone, is that what you're saying?
No, the previous sector plans, they all had the boundary. And so what the IDO did is effectively extend that boundary across properties where the boundary crossed. And so what this amendment is doing is really allowing the previous boundary to accept, which by the way, you and I helped even extend that boundary, from the monument, through several of those sector plans.
Okay. Well, I noticed in your write-up, you said, well, this will give us more shopping, more jobs, this and that, but all the MX zones on the west side, they're all apartments. They're not providing any jobs. They're just providing more high density and taller buildings. And that's what people are concerned about. And then as far as the sector plans had a limit on the height and for commercial areas, and that wasn't even put into the IDO. And that's what's created a lot of problems too. So I do see a lot of issues going on, and maybe there should be more discussion about, getting more sensitive development of more appropriate up there. Because I can see if we keep on this path of high density, taller buildings, I think it's going to create a lot of impacts up there. And I think we need to evaluate some things.
Yeah, sure. And of course, I'm always, willing to do that and work with you all on doing that. I think what we're talking about, specifically with this amendment though, is policies or recommendations or this proposal and how it furthers the policy of the IDO. And I think what you mentioned there was justification for furthering the policy of the IDO, and certainly furthering the policies of the previous sector plans.
And the policies of the comp plan too, which had a lot of good policies in protecting our natural and cultural resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly this amendment, I think it's clear, and you can see that there's nothing in this amendment that changes even what the previous sector plans and comprehensive plans had done. So, but thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Ms. Horvath. All right, Ms. Samuel, followed by John Edward.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rhiannon Samuel, and I'm the Executive Director for NAIOP New Mexico. NAIOP supports O2373. We support this proposed amendment to the VPO2, NAIOP supports the proposed amendments in VPO2, which set the limit of 15-foot building height restriction within that height restriction subarea. But the VPO took it way further than its protective intent, saying where the height restriction overlay boundary crosses the lot line, the entire lot is subject to the 15-foot height restriction. This is where the VPO, as currently written, oversteps. The area outside of the VPO boundary is intended for relatively intense development through a variety of designations. Paseo del Norte is designated as a commuter corridor and the premium transit corridor. The north side of Paseo is designated as the Volcano Heights Urban Center, one of only 2 such designations in Albuquerque. And the south side of Paseo is within the urban center, 1,300-foot buffer area. Zoning along the impacted area of Paseo already requires a height restriction ranging from 35 to 65 feet. The zoning, the transit designations, and the urban center designation are all in sync for higher density development. If the VPO amendment does not pass, there's a high probability that these relatively large parcels will remain vacant. NAIOP urges this committee and the City Council to reverse the EPC recommendations and support this important amendment. Please allow this area to develop as it was intended by the comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Samuel. Mr. Edward.
Hello, everybody. All right, excuse me one moment. All right, so if a plane crashes on the border, which side of the border do they bury the survivors? Do you have an answer?
The one they came from.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that you recognize that the border means something. And in
No
these,
survivors.
and in these city policies, borders and boundaries don't mean anything on a map. 99% of people, when they look at a map and they see a line, something is different on one side of that line and something is different on the other. Unless you're in Albuquerque. That's really what the story is about. This is a land grab. And not only that they don't define the borders based upon the way they define them. That peninsula that comes up Paseo there is not 650 feet from the edge of the escarpment. It's about 1,800 feet from the edge of the escarpment. That is an unnatural feature. It's not even close. I mean, his amendment is nice, but it doesn't even come close to addressing the basic definition of how you define this. Now, my family owns a parcel there. We own several parcels, 252 acres, of which 75 acres, 30% of it is affected by this law, for which we'll have to take a 77% reduction in building heights. And we're not getting compensated for it. I think the city is in a rough, tough spot here if they don't pass this. To the extent that it's a land grab. It's a removal of value. And if you go back to when Lou Colombo and Michael Cadigan first came to us and said, we want you to plan this area, and we're going to do it as a heart of the West Side. The West Side has no heart. There is no placemaking. Ultimately, it is now an urban center. But they came to us and they said, you know, we're going to maybe put buildings in there that are 150 feet tall. And now you're telling me 15 feet. This is not fair. There is no integrity. And I think that his amendment brings a little bit of integrity back to what the average property owner, when they look at a map, a boundary should mean something.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. All right, we're going to move on to folks on Zoom. And I couldn't see folks when they were on Zoom. So when we turn on your camera, we're going to ask you to raise your hand and do the affirmation just to make sure we're completely legal. We'll do in order, James Hoffman, Baxter Sosebee, and then Chantel Walter. So Mr. Hoffman, can you raise your right hand and say,
Yes.
Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, I urge council to approve this amendment proposed by Councilor Lewis. I think the EPC ruling missed a few points, as has been noted. This area is also an urban center. That's in the Volcano Heights plan. They don't mention that. They mention the other two sector plans. They, as we've said, this is also going to reverse something that the IDO created. They seem to indicate in their findings that planning was done like this for decades for the IDO. It wasn't. It was created by the IDO. I also submitted a written comment describing the overlay zone, which there are maps from the escarpment plan. The area north of Paseo del Norte, if staff could put up a map later on, you'll be able to see that the monument is over a half mile wide at that point. There's 1,000 feet, as the previous speaker mentioned, not just the 650, because the way the escarpment undulates through there. So there's a lot of protections that are in there, whereas other areas, actually where some of the speakers, Santa Fe Village and the Volcano Cliffs were prematurely platted. The plan says the Santa Fe Village and Marsh Peninsula areas, some lots are platted close enough that you can't even construct trails to damage the slope. That was on page 91. And I do want to say that I was frustrated
because these neighborhood associations got the benefit of the facilitated meetings, whereas I'm part of Paradise Hills, and I never got any notification. So I don't think that we were fully represented in that staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Sosaby.
Hello.
Can
Okay,
you-
I do see my camera's up.
I can
Thank
see
you.
you. Sir, would you just raise your right hand and say that you do affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, council and staff members. I oppose 02373. This proposal is another degradation of the original concept for this area to be a sustainable, walkable community area with a mix of residential and low-impact commercial enterprises. Instead, this rush to increase heights will destroy the view, not only for the nearby residents, for the entire city, looking toward the Northwest Mesa. Central and East Albuquerque residents may not have this on their radar, but they will be quick to notice when the skyline begins polluted with tall buildings. Remember, it was these residents who drove the original height, stucco color, and non-reflective glass restrictions for this area. Consider your choice: a skyline of 3 and potentially 5-story buildings right up against this yellow line office blocks, or a view of the mesas from the entire city and volcanoes unhindered by 1 and 2-story residents and low impact commercial stores. This is your call. The direction should be back to lower height standard, not vertical growth. I urge you to listen to the residents and the EPC and hold the line against the developers who care only about profit per square foot, not about the unique character of Albuquerque. In my closing remarks, I guess I'd like to point out the background I have, which is the Sandias, which is a beautiful feature of Albuquerque. Imagine that skyline you're looking at with 3 and 5-story buildings running across the lower edge of it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sosaby. All right, Chantil Walter. Ms. Walter, if you wouldn't mind raising your right hand and answering, do you affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Chantil Walter. I'm the Environmental Protection Specialist at Petroglyph National Monument, and I'm speaking on behalf of the National Park Service and for Superintendent Nancy Hendricks, who's unable to be here this evening. We submitted some comments, and I'll just highlight a few things. So concerning this VPO2 amendment, the National Park Service is opposed to this. On June 27th, 1990, Congress passed the Petroglyph National Monument Establishment Act, which created the monument as a unit of the National Park System. And we're co-owned and co-managed with the city of Albuquerque. It was created in light of the national significance of the West Mesa Escarpment and the petroglyphs and the urgent need to protect the cultural and natural resources of the area from urbanization and vandalism. The monument is a cultural landscape, and in particular, the 17-mile escarpment is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as an archaeological district. The area contains significant cultural resources, including more than 20,000 petroglyphs and numerous archaeological sites. The monument is also one of the most outstanding features of the West Mesa and is sacred to 29 pueblos and tribes. It's important to the residents of the West Mesa and attracts visitors from the United States and around the world. Protecting the Petroglyph National Monument, one of the few urban national parks in our country, provides aesthetic and economic benefits to the residents and visitors. The proposed change to VPO2 would allow building heights that block views of the escarpment, block views of the volcanoes, and affect views of the cultural landscape across the mesa top. This would profoundly and forever affect the values of the monument, including the sacred cultural landscape and view sheds that are extremely important to 29 pueblos and tribes, and weaken the view protection of the archaeological district and the views to and from the mesa. We respectfully ask the members of the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee to keep the VPO2 as currently written. Please help us protect Petroglyph National Monument for this and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walter. And I believe that's all of the folks that were signed up for public comment. So the next thing on the agenda is 5 minutes of rebuttal by the applicant. And I'm going to open that up to council staff or Councilor Lewis, whoever would like those 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, council staff doesn't have any rebuttal at this time based on testimony given.
Is Counselor Lewis still with us? Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make
Yeah.
sure we're getting a weird message here. All right. Counselor Lewis, did you have anything that you wanted to add as an applicant?
Well, and I think this is, I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, we're going according to our rules and how we introduce amendments like this. And so, so really to say this would be a rebuttal is probably not the best, term for it. Me being the sponsor, I mean, our staff explained how these amendments come about. And they come from, residents and people that have interest in these areas that are zoned these ways. And so they follow through our staff here. And so as a sponsor, I'm like anyone else, like any other counselor where this might be in your district. And the legislative process requires that a city councilor would do this. So, but I certainly support the amendment. Just the previous speaker spoke about the monument. This is a very unique monument, and it happens to be completely surrounded by city, by a city. And I would also say that the monument is surrounded by some of the oldest parts of this city. Some of the areas in Paradise Hills that have been here for many, many years, and we've been a very good partner with the monument. In fact, we've extended that boundary in previous sector plans and comprehensive plans. The city does a lot for the monument. Our city council has spent capital dollars to clean up parts of the monument, where we use our resources to clean up parts of the monument from debris that's been there for 100 years, for a long time. And so so I do take exception to the to the speaker from the monument that had some challenges with this, partly because we've extended that boundary, as well as the fact that we have this amendment does not in any way turn back some of the original comprehensive plans, the sector plans that set those boundaries. It doesn't violate that in any way whatsoever. In fact, the IDO went far beyond what those previous comprehensive plans did, and so which certainly the parks were supportive of that. And so there's been a lot of good comment tonight. I think we have enough that's in the record to be able to move this forward.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. All right, we do have an allowance for anyone who spoke during public comment to get 2 minutes additional to do any cross-examination of basically Ms. Schultz. If you have any further questions, if you do want that, yes, come on up.
Yeah, so I believe I've heard that adopting this will return the boundary to a previous sector plan, a previous plan in which it was 600 or 650 feet. But the height restriction sub area is 330 feet. So I don't see how this change would limit the height restriction sub area to those 330 feet only on each one of those parcels. So I don't get where the 600 feet, if someone can help me understand that.
Ms. Schultz?
Madam Chair, I was referencing what I thought was where that yellow line that you are seeing on the screen was determined from. My understanding of the Northwest Mesa Escarpment Area Plan, my understanding of that plan said that, and I'm going to try and fact check myself while I'm responding, said that 650 feet out from the escarpment, that is where heights would be limited to 15 feet. So that's what that yellow line represents today. I understand the public speaker to be saying that that should have only been 300 feet.
That's the actual language of the IDO. The height restriction sub area is 330 feet from the rock face on either side. So above and below.
And then further out.
Madam Chair, I would need a little bit of time to research that nuance, but I think the outcome is the same, whether the old plan said 300 or 600. The IDO adopted this boundary based on what that plan said. The IDO then went on to extend the 15-foot height restriction beyond where that plan says a 15-foot height restriction should exist. I'm sorry if there was a lack of clarity about the 300 versus 650. I'd be happy to look into that, but I can't do it on the fly.
Sure. And I want to clarify because now I'm confused and I thought I was not confused. So the yellow area is 650 feet from the escarpment
Madam Chair,
on this map.
that's the discrepancy I think we're discussing right now, is whether it's 300 or 650.
Okay. What, I want to make sure that we stay on track here. I'll come back to you, Counselor, but we do have someone else that wanted to do a cross-examination. You have 2 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
How are buildings that are treated that are inside that line, not just dividing a lot, but inside that line already that already violate the 15-foot limitation? How does that apply? There's a Walmart, there's an APS school, and there's several 2-story homes.
Mr. Edwards, you're saying that within that yellow boundary we're looking at on the screen today, there are buildings that are taller than 15 feet?
Yeah, there's an APS school over by 98 where it comes in over by the Near Haven development. There's also the Walmart grocery store just below this, and there's homes that abut the northwest side and eastern sides of this, not abutted, but they're within the yellow boundary lines. All you have to do is go on Google Earth and you can see it.
Madam Chair, Mr. Edwards, I think we would need to look at the individual approvals for those development requests to understand, if they came in before the IDO was in place, that they were not within the boundary, or perhaps before the sector plan established that impact area, which is what we're talking about. But I can't speak to how prior development was approved as a part of this request for a future IDO amendment. I'm sorry.
Any follow-up? You have some time left if you had another one.
Well, it seems as though that people live by details of laws.
All right, thank you. And I do believe we have someone on Zoom. Who is it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim Hoffman would like to.
Sure. Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I just want to provide a little bit of clarification on the 650 feet. And from the Northwest Escarpment Plan, I provided written public comments. You should all have that. The Northwest Mesa Escarpment Plan defined the 9% slope area that was surveyed and should have been put into the Aegis system. And then from there is 300 feet for the conservation area, or double lots where it was previously platted prior to the escarpment plan, which is the case south of Paseo in Volcano Cliffs. And then on top of that 300 for the conservation area where you're not supposed to build at all, there is 350 feet. So 300 plus 350 is 650. That is the impact area, and that is what the yellow line actually depicts. It's clearly in there. It's in my written public comment to answer any of those questions. But as I said, because of the way the escarpment moves around, that area north of Paseo is over a half mile wide. So it's, in many cases, from the escarpment face, it's actually much more than 650 feet.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, did you have a response to that?
Madam Chair, no response, but thank you, Mr. Hoffman, for clarifying. The 650 number came from 2 different metrics from the previous plan that got added together to create this yellow boundary in part.
Okay, and we have one more online.
Yes, Madam Chair, Baxter Sosabe.
And Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that the 2 minutes for these speakers is specifically supposed to be for rebuttal to the applicant. And so that information was helpful for Mr. Hoffman, but this portion of the agenda is supposed to be for questions directed at me to challenge anything that I maybe said during my presentation that they would like to disagree with.
Right, cross-examination.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Sosabe.
Yes, thank you. And for the council's consideration, maybe this is the cart before the horse. If everything to the west of that yellow line was pulled back to the 26-foot restrictions, then that would be good. That would allow these property owners to commercially develop in a sustainable and low impact way. And then this amendment would begin to make sense in my view. So I would ask Councilor Lewis and you all to consider an IDO change to pull back to the 26 feet and include this amendment as part of that. And then I think you would get concurrence from not only the property owners for these commercial development, but also all of us who oppose this.
Thank you, Mr. Sosebee. Was there a question there? Because we are in cross-examination. I want to make sure if there's a question for Ms. Schultz. We get that.
Okay, the question is why don't you consider changing the IDO back to the 26 or to the 26-foot restriction and then propose this amendment?
Madam Chair, Mr. Sosebee, the scope of this request was very narrowly created last fall. It is the purview of the council while we have the VPO open to consider other changes to it. But myself as a staff member, I'm not a policymaker, and so it would not be my purview or responsibility or interest to consider those types of changes.
Good answer, Ms. Schultz. All right, I want to make sure that anybody else that had signed up to speak and spoke earlier, if you have any questions, let me know. I don't see, oh, yes, sir.
Yes, for Ms. Schultz. Do you know of what part of Special Assessment District 228 is changed from what the drawing up there in terms of the impact and the footprint of the restricted area as a result of the language in the IDO that says the entire lot is included?
Madam Chair, and I'm sorry.
I'm Tony Williams.
Mr. Williams, special assessment districts are not a consideration when the council in their legislative authority creates or amends zoning. We don't consider special assessment districts. Those are kind of private agreements between property owners and developers in which the city is not a party to, from my understanding. And if there are lawyers in the room that would like to correct me on that, please do. So I do not have that information because it would not have been relevant to the consideration in this request.
I don't know the answer to this, but you're suggesting that a zone change that takes away the developability of the property on which the special assessment district was based is not on the table?
Madam Chair, Mr. Williams, I think I understand the question a little more directly now. It sounds like you're discussing what we would call a takings. Which would be a problem if we were making the property completely undevelopable. The regulations as they exist today, even with the 15-foot height limitations, do allow for development. It would just be low density residential development that is perhaps not desired for the comprehensive plan in this part of town. If we were establishing a zoning regulation that would make a property entirely undevelopable, that would certainly be a concern and a consideration for the council. But my understanding of what's on the books today and what's proposed through this ordinance, that is not the case.
Even if the zoning assumption that was made at the time of the district was that it would be multi-story mixed use.
Madam Chair, Mr. Williams, in their legislative capacity, the council does have the authority to change zoning over time. And so even though a zoning entitlement in district may have existed at one point in time, the council can change that, and that's how the council exercises their land use and planning authority.
All right, seeing no more cross-examination, we're going to move on to comments by the planning department if they have any. Is that a shaking head? No, all right. Council planning staff, 5 minutes to close.
Madam Chair, committee members, I don't have any further information in closing. If you have questions or clarifications about the request, about the amendment, I'm happy to answer those.
All right. And Councilor Vinton, you had a question earlier. Did you still have that?
I don't recall.
Okay. Any other questions from any councilors?
Madam Chair,
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, I think I wanted just to address the final comments there regarding the SAD, and I would be interested. I think this would have been something that would have come up during the finalizing of the SAD, and maybe it didn't, but I would like to hear at some point, maybe not tonight in this, but I think it's a valid point that the SAD was established, that SAD 228 was established with certain revenues that would come from from the tax dollars that would pay off the infrastructure that was put in. That's what it's designed to do. But if in that time or after that is the SAD begins, and then the council comes in, say with the IDO, and makes changes to what that property could ultimately be developed as, and yet those properties are being assessed in a way that they would be developed in a certain way. And so I do think that there's some valid questions there regarding that. I think that, but I don't know if it's, I think it doesn't. It certainly gives justification for this amendment. But I think there's also some other ramifications of that could leave the city vulnerable in some ways, and certainly would damage the whole ultimate purpose of that SAD, which is to be able to, we don't just allow homes to be built on the mesa without any infrastructure, and so an SAD provides the infrastructure to be able to build good neighborhoods, the kind of neighborhoods that we want to see. And so not really a question, more of a comment that I would like to hear more from the staff, I think at a certain point regarding the effects on the SAD. But if anything, it certainly justifies this amendment, this change.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Ms. Schultz, do you have information on that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lewis, I think I understand that question pretty clearly, and I can commit to before the next hearing, whether it's at this body, if it's the will of this body that this item be deferred and stay in this committee, or this still has to go before the full city council, we can definitely get that answered prior to any next hearing on this matter.
And Madam Chair, like I mentioned, I don't think it affects this decision right now. So I certainly don't think it. I'm not asking that so that we can have some time that we would defer it. I think and really probably it would just be an opinion of our city attorney's office on it, which I don't think would take very long and certainly wouldn't merit any kind of deferral of this bill.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Councilor Benton.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point of this amendment is to remedy the situation with the SAD, not to, I mean, a decision were made. We don't know exactly how those decisions were made during the development of the IDO, which converted our old zoning structures to this. And I could guess that it might have seemed administratively more convenient or something along those lines. I don't know that if that were the case, a decision could have been made to exclude from the protection area, part of a site. So decisions were made that we don't quite understand and of how that occurred with the IDO and the consultants and the planning department and everyone who worked on it. But I do think this remedies the SAD question, and it would be good to have more clarity on that. But I think it's important to note that that the IDO was a very large overhaul of our zoning. Everyone knows that. It was intended, it was never the intention, though, I think, of the council, and Councilor Jones and I were the co-sponsors of the IDO. I won't speak for her, but I don't think it was the intention ever to drastically change the regulatory structure of zoning in Albuquerque, but rather to try to make it more uniform and understandable. And we're also have annual updates for that very reason, that we want to stay on top of it and find areas where it's not working. This is one where I think time is of the essence. So just some comments. Thanks.
All right. Any other?
Madam Chair and Councilor Lewis, this is Kevin Morrow. I'm standing in as the city attorney and we're happy to work with Ms. Schultz and council staff and find an answer to your SAD questions.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. I have a couple questions. So I just want to make sure I understand the amendment that's on the table right now is the amendment that Councilor Lewis moved. That basically replaces the EPC findings with new findings that say that this change is justified. And is that a correct way of boiling that down?
Madam Chair, that's exactly correct.
Okay, all right, so unless there are any other questions, we are going to move to a vote on the amendment. Councilor Lewis's amendment is what we're voting on. Call it.
Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Crowe.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor Lewis.
Yes.
Counselor Pivocorn.
No.
That passes on a 4-1 vote.
All right, now we're back. We are on the amended bill. I'm sorry, the amended ordinance. Any questions on the amended ordinance? We're going to move to, and it was a due pass moved by Councilor Lewis, seconded by, I believe it was Councilor Benton. Is that true? I just want to make sure we have a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. So we're on due pass as amended to full council, and no questions? Roll call.
Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Crowe.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor Lewis.
Yes.
Counselor Pivocorn.
No.
That passes on a 4-1 vote.
All right. Thank you all for coming out and participating this evening. This is by far the most people have ever shown up for a Lux meeting in my tenure here. So good to see you all. Right, we're going to move on to agenda item D. D is 076, applying a historic protection overlay zone to the East End addition, identifying the distinctive cultural significance of the area and providing general preservation guidelines. I'll move the pass. Second. All right. So 02376 is yet another quasi judicial request, which requires special procedures to allow the applicant, staff, and the public the opportunity to speak. This agenda item will proceed as follows: 5 minutes for council planning staff, 10 minutes for the applicant's presentation, 2 minutes each for testimony by public speakers, 5 minutes for rebuttal by the applicant. Cross-examination by anyone who spoke during the public comment period will have 2 minutes each. Comments by the planning department, if they have any, for 5 minutes. And council planning staff closing argument comments, 5 minutes. Anybody who's going to be speaking on this, city staff, members of the public, and the applicant must be sworn in. If you'll be speaking to this item as a staff member or a member of the public, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony today will be true? All right. I believe it's Ms. Morris who will begin this, the opening comments. Hi, Ms. Morris.
Good evening, councilors. This is 076. This bill proposes to adopt a historic protection overlay zone for the East End addition. I believe that there is showing on the screens, either right now or any moment now, an image showing the general vicinity of the East End addition. It's in the northwest.
Are you able to share your screen to pull up the map?
Oh, okay. Yes, I can share my screen. Hang on a second. Okay, hang on a second, kiddo. So showing on my screen is the general location of the proposed historic protection overlay zone. So it's the northwest corner of Lomasson, Wyoming. It is 12 parcels zoned R1C on Virginia Street. There are 10 properties here. 2 of the parcels are vacant. The historic protection overlay zone is proposed for the first African-American suburb in Albuquerque. I believe Ms. Naji is with you guys to provide a lot more background on the history of this area and the need And so I won't repeat what she's probably about to say, but I'm available for any questions.
All right.
Ms. Najee, if you'd like to come up to the center table here and provide some context to the committee for the request.
Good evening. Madam Chair. The East End Edition has been sort of in the news for the past 30 years. Changes have come so that it was sort of dropped many years ago. It is a very small community, but it still is a community. It was developed in the early 1950s. The land had been owned by a Black investors group. And one of the daughters went to develop this back then. Finding funding was virtually impossible because they would not lend to Black neighborhoods. So they found a developer that was in Arizona who had done some earlier development building there in Phoenix, and brought them out here and began building these remaining homes that are here on Virginia Street. There were originally 16 homes that were built by the original developer, the first property owner. A lot of the land that had been quite an extensive piece of property, but because of the cost of building and infrastructure and the property taxes, then they had to sell off most of it. So there were 2 blocks originally. Like I said, there were 16 homes that were built by the original developer, and within the next 10 years, there were probably another 16. So that included Vermont and Virginia. The properties on Vermont were largely demolished, and they were built later, and they've had massive redevelopment to them, so they don't really maintain the integrity. Slowly, the properties are starting to be demolished, pushing up from Lomas. So we felt like we really needed to do something to be able to protect this area rather than it being a footnote or history books, to be able to still show this community. We did, as I say, there are only 12 lots. There are only 10 homes that remain, but they could be rebuilt. It would be nice if we had some control over what went on there and to prevent further demolition. We've been out to talk with the neighborhood to convince them or see if they're interested. We did get a positive response from the people in the community. There's not a neighborhood association for that area beyond the coalition, so we didn't get a lot of input from them, but we did go out and knock on doors. And it is our intention, should this continue through city council, then we would set up some very specific meetings with the remaining 10 property owners to work on exactly what we want to do with those guidelines. It is not currently a registered historic district with the state or with the national registration, but we do have plans to perhaps pursue that, but we felt like we needed to get something to honor and mark and protect this area as soon as possible.
Thank you. I don't have any public speakers signed up for this item. Is that still true? Okay. So there'll be no testimony by public speakers, no rebuttal, no cross-examination. So we'll move to the planning department if they have anything to add. And they do not. So council planning staff, Ms. Morris, if you want to do any closing comments, then we'll go to questions from the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No closing comments or questions, but I am available for any questions, as is Ms. Najee.
Thank you. All right, questions from the committee?
I just have a couple.
Ms. Graff, Councilor Graff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is wonderful. I think it's I actually have one of my customers lives on the street, so I'm thrilled to know that it will be safe. You mentioned that there are 2 lots that don't have any structure on them right now. How will somebody proceed to build? Will it have to be just like those before?
Well, typically the way that we've set up our guidelines for the historic protection overlays is that any new construction has to go before the Landmarks Commission. Generally, what we would be looking for would be residential homes that would be at the same scale with the same front yard setbacks and things like that. They wouldn't have to exactly mimic the houses that are there, which considering there's only 10 houses and there's probably 4 different styles of houses out of those 10. There's a lot of variety one can use to do that. But we would hope that if any buildings were to go on those sites, that it would be residential and at the same scale that is currently on the street.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Benton.
Yeah, the presentation, Ms. Najjar, you mentioned that it would, I think you used to say prevent demolition, but it wouldn't entirely prevent demolition. Is that right? It would just put, or could you explain that?
Generally, the way we do demolition reviews within HPOs is that if somebody wanted to demolish a property, they would have to show that there was no possibility of it being able to be preserved or to generate income. These homes that are there now, I mean, and it's a questionable thing when a property gets vacated, the sooner you can get somebody back into that home, the less likely it is that it falls into disrepair. And I think there's a strong community there, and they have been concerned with that. We did make efforts at one point to prevent the latest demolition, but we were unsuccessful with that. It's not to say that they never could, but we could certainly put a hold on it for, I think we're given a year to be able to work on alternatives, and that can be, to get somebody else to purchase the property or whatever else we might come up with.
So it puts that cushion of a period to try to come up with alternatives to demolition.
Yeah.
Doesn't entirely preclude.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilor Graff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one more question. What kind of shape are these homes in right now?
They're in good shape. I mean, like I said, the last one that was demolished, it had been vacant for a while.
Okay.
And so, there are some security issues just in that area because it's close to the highway.
Yes.
Interchange there at Wyoming. But some of the people have been there since the 1950s, or the house has been within their families. One of the houses has just been like completely restored.
Oh, good.
And so, they sort of run the range between completely restored and having been lived in for 60 years, 70 years. But for what they are, they're in reasonable shape.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from counselors? I can't see Councilor Lewis. All right. With that, I'm just going to say that, this is in my district. I was really excited to learn about it. I didn't know the history of that area. And if I didn't know the history of that area, I'm guessing a lot of folks don't. And so this is a really great opportunity to do some education. And so I'm pretty excited about the whole process. So with no further questions, we'll go to a roll call vote.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Graff,
Yes.
Councilor Jones,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pivotal.
Yes.
Passes on a 5-0 vote.
All right. There being no further business, this Lux Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.